Welcome to this member brief. We'll be doing many more of these. This one tonight is on building and managing a board. We've got a couple really amazing guest members to talk to you guys about that and share some wisdom and experience. Before we get there, though, I just want to make a couple quick announcements. This is our second member brief since COVID sort of went away. We're going to be doing many, many more of these. So watch the calendar, log in to your dashboard, and also look at keep an eye out for the newsletter. Well, we'll also be talking about the events that are coming up. We have one coming up on understanding valuations. We have one coming up on evolving as a founder into an exec, a C-level exec in a company. Great guest on that one. We'll announce that soon. And another one on the inside the mind of a VC. We have very, very experienced investors who are going to share their thoughts about how they think about startups and investing and so forth. You'll learn a lot as a founder from that. We're also starting our live events back up. Watch out for poker and founders dinners coming back soon in April. We're going to launch in most of our cities. We'll be launching a couple new cities and rolling out more and more of those. We also have some new programs around office hours, mentor and investor office hours, live pitch coaching. We have a number of things we're gonna do. I'm very excited about it. So watch the newsletter and the calendar for those things. We're going to do an experiment tonight too. Some of you, I'm sure, were involved in some of our previous events where we did virtual networking. We used a different product back then. We're going to experiment with that tonight too. If you want to hang around a little bit afterwards, in fact, you'd be doing me a favor if you'd give it 5 minutes to give it a try and let me know what you think. One of the challenges I think with virtual networking is you never know who you're going to get matched up with. And if it's a person that you don't find very interesting, that can be a challenge. But Startup Haven, members only, founders and investors, I'm sure everybody here would love to have a conversation with everybody else who's here. So give that a try. Stay as long as you want. We'll let it run for 30 minutes. It'll be 5-minute sessions, randomly matched, and you can move on early if you need to. All right. So thanks for that. So the topic tonight is building a board and managing a board. And the thing about building a board, among other things, it's a venture scale thing. You can start a bakery or a consulting company or any sort of lifestyle business, and you don't necessarily need a board. Board isn't a major feature of building that kind of company, but it is a major feature of every single successful venture scale company. And so that's why it's so important. That's why we wanted to spend some time helping you understand. If you've never built a board before, or if you've built your first board and you're struggling to manage it and to get good at that, I hope you get some advice tonight that'll help you. We're not here to teach you everything about boards. There's a lot. We could talk for hours on this. So tonight, we're trying to just touch on the whens and why and how and how many and what if and those sorts of things. I hope that what this does is it starts you off on that journey to figure out the rest of it. There's resources available. We're going to follow up. One of our guest speakers tonight offered up a couple of resources that we'll share with everybody as well. But it's really important. You got to do it right. And I'll share also, as a startup founder myself, I had a particular episode with one of my startups, and one of our speakers knows about this episode. Having a board, we had a board too late, and it had a significant impact on the company. And I wish I would have had this session back then. It is so critical. It can make or break a company in some cases. And so you want to do it right. And so hopefully you'll learn some things here. And then from here, use that to go further as a foundation and get your board. So tonight, I got 2 amazing guests. And I'm honestly honored to have them here. Starting with Janis Machala. So Janis Machala is the poster child of being a veteran in the startup ecosystem. She's been involved at least, I think, 20, 25 years, long time. She was actually my very first mentor, the first person I would say that I met as a startup founder working on my very first company, who helped me figure some stuff out. And I've had the privilege of continuing to spend time with her over all these years. And it's just been a treat. She's so knowledgeable, has done so much to help so many startups in the Pacific Northwest. I used to call her the godmother of startups, but I think probably more appropriately, it's the fairy godmother of startups. So you'll meet Janis tonight in a minute. Lisa Nelson is also with us. Lisa, incredible technology exec career, financial services, and she was one of the founding partners of Microsoft's M12 Ventures, their venture fund, and has, I know personally, over the last couple of years, has made it part of her raison d'etre to understand and get involved in boards. So she's a tremendous resource as well. She's seen it from both sides, as both her and Janis have. So I want to introduce them, bring them on stage now. Please, everybody, welcome Janis. Did I get this right? There we go.
Good job.
Welcome, you guys. But anyway, thank you guys both for agreeing to come and spend some time. Startup Haven, one of the reasons that I've done this for 15 years is because of people like you who are willing to help. And so we've got, a couple thousand founders and investors who are all super willing to help. And I'm grateful that you guys made time tonight. So
Thanks, Village.
You have a little bit of fun tonight too.
Yeah. Is
there anything in in that very brief bio that I intro that I made for both of you that you want to enhance? Is there anything, any wins you want to talk about? Any special things you're working on right now?
A couple things. One is I've been a startup CEO, which it was sort of the kickoff of my going from Microsoft to a startup that was actually a turnaround startup. And also, I have been an angel investor. I've invested in venture funds. I have sat on boards with venture capitalists. So I've seen it from that side. I was co-founder of the first women's angel group in the country, where there was 13 of us, one of which was Sue Preston, who is with Sea Change Fund. She was one of us. And so have been very involved in the ecosystem of angel as well as venture community. One of the wins that I had recently was a board that I was involved with the founders from the very beginning, when they basically took a company from being a professional services company. We turned it into a SaaS data management company, and that company was sold last year to SAIC. It was a very good exit. Founders are thrilled, and I was on the board, actually formed that board, recruited that board, and was on that board, and we brought in a corporate venture into that company, who happened to be the first customer, commercial customer. So that was a very, very satisfying trajectory.
Terrific. Thank you.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. Lisa?
Such a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Bob, for having me. Yeah, maybe just adding on to the bio, I'll say, I've since left Microsoft. I left about 2.5 years ago, and I went gallivanting around the world for about 7 months before COVID brought me back to the US and sort of locked me down. But it was a great opportunity. And in that time, I've since built a portfolio of boards that I'm on. So today I sit on 6 commercial boards. And that ranges from a couple of early stage fintech startups to a small privately owned professional services firm, to a pre-IPO bank, and to a public space tech company. And we just had our first commercial payloads put up into space earlier this week. So it's a very exciting time. And I will say Janis helped me secure one of my board seats. So it was through an introduction that Janis had made for me, and that's how I was able to get on that board. So very familiar with the board work. I've really enjoyed it. I love the opportunity to engage with companies in a very different capacity than I had as an operator and an executive at Microsoft. And I love this whole portfolio thing, being able to work with several companies, at the same time, not just one. So excited for the conversation tonight.
That's terrific. Thank you. It's just so great to have you guys both here. Now, we're going to do something. This wasn't part of the original plan, but it occurred to me today that there's so much to cover that honestly we could talk for hours. So I wanted to just clear the decks a little bit and do a rapid fire session for a couple minutes. And let's just tick off some of the basic mechanical things about boards so that we can get on to what I think is the more interesting and subtle aspects of building and managing a board. So I'm going to throw out a question. your best, fastest advice. Don't screw around. Like, don't wonder if it should be this way. Just do this and you'll be fine. We can certainly put a pin in some of these and come back to them. I don't mean to oversimplify, but let's just see what we can do just to bring everybody up to some basics on building a board. So first of all, how many board of directors should there be?
It depends.
Yes, quickly. What does it depend on?
3 at the beginning, 5 ideally.
Always an odd number.
Yes.
Good. And should the founders be on a real board? Now, every corporation by law has a board. It's usually just the founder or the co-founders, and they take, I'll be the secretary role and you'll be, the chair and whatever. But for that first real board, where should the founders be on that board?
Of their own company?
Yeah. Of their own company.
Of their own company, yeah.
At the beginning, yeah. I think 2 founders and 1 something else, whether it's their first investor or whether it's an independent they want to have. I think that's great.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, that 5-person board, one of the founders.
Gotcha. Good.
Yeah, I would agree with Janis. Definitely being on the board as the CEO and the founder.
Good. Who should be the chair of the board?
I would say it depends. I say early on it's the CEO, but I think eventually as the company grows and scales, it should be, you should think about possibly a transition, somebody else being the chair of the board.
Yeah, I'm a big fan, especially if it's a first-time CEO, having an executive chairman. They did that at F5 with Jeff Fusey, and it was a very successful. Al Higginson and Jeff Fusey. That's a great model when you have someone who hasn't been through that trajectory. But I think early on, it's fine.
Good. And how are board members compensated?
It depends. There's a lot of it depends. If it's a VC, that's the privilege of them vesting the money. They get paid on the carry. If they're asking for compensation, then they're the wrong VC, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But if they're an independent board member, stock options.
Good.
Yeah, and later on down the as the company grows and scales, often cash is a component of the board compensation as well.
Good. And would that be just for board compensation, or would that be sort of special projects compensation?
That's different.
Yeah, that would be different outside the realm of board work.
Gotcha. Good. All right. And
let me qualify that though. Committees oftentimes have a different component associated with them. So if you're chairing a committee, that might have something extra with it.
Gotcha. And I'll add to that typically travel expenses are paid for board members to travel to board meetings. Those budgets should be a lot lower now after COVID and all the virtualness, but okay, good. And what does a board do? What sort of decisions are they involved in? This is a longer answer, obviously, than 20 seconds.
Hire and fire the CEO.
Hire and fire the CEO. Number 1, you're accountable. Yes.
Approve the annual budget. Ensure there's a strategic plan for the company.
Good. Yeah, I think there are a lot of what I would call, I don't know, tactical is not the right word, but some very defined things that Janis has just mentioned, like hire and fire a CEO, approve the budget, ensure that there's a strategic plan in place. I think also the best boards that I've been involved with can also, get more involved in the strategy and helping determine, come up with the strategic plan, right? So they don't actually create it, but they weigh in and they provide an opinion. They provide a perspective. Hey, based on what I've seen, based on what we did at these other companies, based on my experiences, I think this is an interesting idea. Or no, hey, Bob, that's maybe not the best way to do it. And let me tell you why. So it's really an opportunity for the founders and, the CEO, maybe the chairman of the board, chairperson of the board. It's really a sounding board and people to listen to and sort of learn from.
Yeah. I think the key that Lisa's saying that's different is that it's to listen to and a sounding board. They're not there to tell you how to do it.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. You can think about them as sort of sometimes mentors, right? Or informal advisors. So they're not necessarily getting paid to be an advisor per se, but for example, in some of the boards that I'm on, the CFO, because I have a finance background and accounting background, sometimes I'll spend some extra time with the CFO, just answering their questions, providing some insight into, how they're thinking about the business, talent, systems, operational type stuff or whatever. But that's just sort of part of the relationship between a good board director and a company, I think. But it is very, very important, as Janice had mentioned, a good board director is not operational. They are not in the weeds and they are not trying to run the business. They are merely providing advice and insight.
So when you join a board or when you recruit someone to join your board as a director, do you have an explicit conversation about here's the things that we want you to do, right? The things we want you to participate in, the kinds of advice that we want, the kinds of not operationally, of course, but for example, opening doors, introducing, making introductions for the company. How explicit should you be when you meet a board director and invite them to be on the board about what the expectation is for that board member?
I think it's really important to understand what the CEO believes a board member is and what their role is, because I think there is some misconception sometimes about the role of a board member and where that line is. And so I think expectations and what they want from a board member is really helpful, because it might not be what I'm interested in doing as a board member. So it's got to work on both sides. So if you're hiring me because I have this market development experience and you're really interested in how I think about go to market and entering new markets or pivoting or all of those things around that, that's my superpower and that's awesome. But if you want me to work the fundraising process and be a pseudo investment banker for you, that isn't going to be terribly interesting, nor is it something that I should be doing, as a board member, running the pipeline, for example.
Yeah, well, let's talk about what makes a good board member and how to recruit them and what sort of, and this is a bigger discussion, obviously, but the composition of the board and how you recruit for those specific positions. And one of the things and I think it'd be useful to distinguish for folks who haven't gone down this road before. Yes, advisory is part of what they do, but that's not an advisory board, and how you work with an advisory board will be very, very different than how you work with a board of directors. But let's talk for a minute now. You're going to do your first 5-person board. Your 3-person board was you and your co-founder and the angel investor, or this person who's really smart, and you put it together so you could have a board. It's helpful, but it's not it's not that the big operating board that you're going to have to build eventually. So for that first 5-person board, how should you think as a CEO what the composition of that board should be?
This is a very formal thing that bigger boards do, but I think it's also helpful for smaller boards, or I should say earlier stage companies. So for larger boards, we refer to it as a skills matrix. And I think that's a great framework to think about, what are the skills and experiences that we need on this board? What are the skills and experiences that we can most draw from that are going to benefit the company and help us grow, right? So that might be marketing, go to market, right? We need some more expertise in go to market. So thinking about somebody with that. It might be global, right? You want to expand your footprint into other geographies. And so having somebody on the board who has experience working in global operations or global companies would be really helpful. I will say finance, so sort of my skill set around finance and audit and all of that generally isn't something that earlier boards need, because they have a CFO to help them with that. Right. And they have investors that can generally help them with that. That's a skill that comes later. But the reason I'm on 2 boards, as I said earlier, 2 early stage startups, is because I have a viewpoint, a perspective around innovation and strategy. And I have a really big network when it comes to investors. And so that's something that a lot of early boards will want help with, right? As they think about the need and the process for fundraising, how can they get introductions and warm introductions at that? How can they get help with their pitch deck, let's say, and just some overall feedback, and then those introductions? So back to Janice's point, I think being clear about what it is you want from a board member is really important for both sides. I don't think you want to be too explicit, though. I think you want to set boundaries about what that could be, but you don't want to say, hey, look, I just want warm introductions and that's it, because that's probably not going to be super interesting to the prospective board director. But also, like, things will change within the company, right? And different issues and different matters will come up, and you want to be able to tap into the expertise of the board for that.
Mhm.
Right. So, yeah, let me give you an example. So, when I was building out the Covers board, which I did with the founder, one of the things that the founders had no experience fundraising. They had no finance and operations experience. They had never done anything in enterprise software. And so I thought through that and I said, well, wouldn't it be great if I could find somebody who's been a CEO, who has a finance and operations background, who has been involved with venture, who's been involved with M&A, who's kind of done that whole set of things. Well, it turns out Sterling Wilson has all of those characteristics. And, he was the president, or he was the CFO of Concur, and then he was the president of another company that sold. So he's had a lot of that experience. And so he was like the first one who came to my mind because he checked all those boxes. So it was like that matrix that Lisa talked about. I didn't formalize it quite that much. It was just kind of like in my head, I had and then when it came to another time, we wanted somebody who had more go-to-market, more productization, because we were taking it from a services product into a product company, and we needed that commercialization product, blah blah blah.
Mhm.
And so it was like, okay, well, who has that kind of uber, able to turn something into a real product that sells to real customers, that can create real revenue, that kind of thing. And so that was the next kind of board member that we recruited. And then obviously the venture people came along.
So the venture people typically will have experience with boards. Sometimes domain experts won't. How should you evaluate the fit of a board member based on their experience, either in business as an operator or as someone with board experience, and as a fledgling startup that can't necessarily pick and choose?
Why can't they pick and choose?
Well, I would love, my two gals in a garage would love to have Lisa Nelson and Janis Machala on our board, but you guys are in high demand. So getting someone who's got a lot of board experience might be harder to attract because the opportunity is not the same. The interest, just sort of the dynamics of that might be different for someone who's sat on 7 boards, and they're amazing person, be great for your board. But you're just raising your pre-seed round, and like you're trying to build your board maybe too early for them, or they might be interested later, but they don't think they can really bring what they have to bear. You can't utilize the help they could give you yet.
Yeah, stage
appropriate
is what you're kind of saying, right?
Yeah,
Some people are more oriented in that early stage. Lisa, do you want to take that?
Well, one thing I'll just maybe clarify or point out is that just because there's whether it's a VC or somebody who's an experienced board member doesn't necessarily mean that they're a great board director. There are a lot of people who have sat on many boards, investors and otherwise, that are just not good directors.
I agree.
And they can often get those director seats because they know the right people, but it's not necessarily based on skill and value add. So Janis?
I was also going to say, just because there's somebody leading your round doesn't mean they have to be the board member. That is negotiable. I just want to make sure everybody hears that. That is negotiable.
Yeah.
And it's a really important point, because your lead investor will get a seat, but that's also a determination, like that's a consideration when you're doing the deal and getting the term sheet. So to Janis's point, if that lead investor and the person who's working on the deal with you, if that's not the right person for you, and you should really try to spend the time understanding if they are, do reference checks, right? Talk to other founders, talk to other board members. And if they're not the right one, then, ask, is there somebody else we could put on the board? And it could be somebody in the firm. It could be somebody else, sort of a mutually connected party.
Yeah. I've done both of those. I've had either another partner in the firm, or I've had an outsider independent who both agreed was a good fit, was tied to the firm, like they were an investor in the fund, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a recent portfolio startup who I thought made just a really wise and mature decision about having an investor on a board, and didn't necessarily just want whoever the VC put on the board, but wanted to have some say in that, and some assurance and some opportunity to vet that person as a good fit for the board. I thought that was really smart.
You brought up an interesting point, Bob, and one of the reasons that I'm a big fan of getting your independent board member earlier rather than later is I want to choose that independent board member. I don't want to have it chosen for me. So if you do a really good job of finding a really strong independent board member that is ventureable, that has, and they can oftentimes bring you your venture people. So I've had like Sterling, Sterling is the kind of guy who, any venture person would be thrilled to have on that board. So if you do a really good job of finding someone who has that profile and is value add for what the company needs, they're not going to fight it later. So you've been in control of the decision around that board member, as opposed to the VC says, hey, I've got this independent director, I think he'd be great. And you have no idea who he is and you have no say, because now it's suddenly the power dynamics a little bit different.
Yeah. So thinking about that earlier, if you're going to build your board and you want to bring the independent on who will help you vet future board members, and including working with a VC that might come on and helping you make sure that's a good fit. So thinking about that very first board member who's not a founder, not an investor, and maybe a subject matter expert, right? Because just being a board specialist might not be the all that you need. You still want to have that domain expertise. How do you think about the characteristics of the first person who's going to come on your board who's not a VC, not a founder? Is there something
in what way?
Well, like for example, we were talking earlier about board experience, right? So if the first independent is just a really smart person in your industry who's had success, but has never been on a board and doesn't really understand the qualities.
I wouldn't put them on my board. I would have them as a consultant or as a advisor.
Yeah.
I think if you're a first-time CEO, you need people who've been on boards before. That's my opinion.
Good.
I would agree with that, because sort of back to the earlier point I was making, you're looking to add people to the board who fill in the gaps for what the company needs. And if the founder hasn't been on a board before and you don't have any other independent board members, you need somebody who has that skill, who has that experience.
By the way, one of the things you can do early on is build an advisory board and start running that advisory board like it's a board. So you start getting like training wheels and practice. So even if you haven't had to even have your board yet, run something so that you start getting practice and understanding the dynamics of just running a really smart group of senior executive business oriented people, so that you aren't thrown into your first board meeting never having done this.
I love that idea. Yeah, that's great.
And they can oftentimes be the tryout for whether there's somebody in there that is going to be your board member, because I've had them convert.
Yeah.
That's what I was just going to say. And likewise, you might have thought they could be a good board member, and you learned through this advisory relationship, like they're just not the right person for you or the organization.
Right.
Yeah, that's a terrific idea. Well, so let's take, I want to let everybody know too, so there's a Q&A channel. If you have questions that you want me to talk about, go ahead and put them in the Q&A channel. Let's take a small step back and then a big step forward. So the small step back is, okay, we're talking about your first real board, that first 5-person board. When's the right time to do that? What are the gating factors? Like, I need to do this now. You might have just had your co-founders on the board. You may not even have that third person, but it's like, wow, we think something's coming in the future. We need to build a board. What are those triggers? What should you be thinking about as a CEO in terms of when's the right time?
Personally, I wouldn't build a 5-person board until I've done a venture round. because it gets complicated fast. That's a
So
lot
when
of.
you say a venture round,
Mhm.
how big a venture round? You just raised 500K for some angels. Is it time?
No,
You raised 2 million from a seed fund.
maybe.
Series A and beyond, definitely.
Mhm.
3 to 5 million or more, call it.
Yeah.
So up until then, though, so if it's the two
I've
gals
seen
in the garage,
2 million where they haven't had a board. I don't happen to agree with that. But I think that's a 3-person board for sure. And depending on who that pre-seed fund is, they may require more.
so that first 3-person board will likely be the CEO,
Mhm.
maybe the CTO as well,
I
and
hope not.
I hope not too, but that's a hard conversation to have.
I can give you the arguments for it.
Oh, good. Go for it.
Oh, no. Finish your thought.
Okay, good. No, so the first, I hate to be trite about the first real board, like the first time someone else is going to be involved in helping you chart the course of your company besides the founders,
Mhm.
right? That's your first board, whether it's
Right.
3 people or 5 people.
Mhm.
So that first, you've raised $1 million or less, let's say, but you want some of that guidance and leadership and advice, right? So how do you know, like, oh, it's time?
Well, that would be what if you're talking about that pre-seed fund, it'd be that funder, maybe an independent, and one of the founders. That'd be my ideal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what you think, Lisa.
Yeah, I think that's right. Maybe just to take the conversation in a slightly different direction and, sort of away from the investment opportunity, although that's
Mhm.
obviously a very big thing. But I would say when the company is at a pivotal point, right,
Mhm.
and there are going to be a bunch of these in the company's
That's a
life
good point.
cycle, right, in the
Mhm.
stage. But when
Mhm.
there's a pivotal moment where it's like, hey, now we really need to think about raising institutional capital. Or, hey,
Right.
now we really need to think about pivoting. We were going direct to consumer and now we're going to be B2B2C.
Mhm.
Something like that, where there's really a need to, again, bring in that expertise and some help from a strategy perspective, right? Like the strategic oversight and somebody that can help sort of answer the questions and help guide the company in the right direction based on whatever is going on. And so often that is an investor because they're at the point where they need to raise capital. And so that's a great point, but there could be other points as well.
Yeah, it could be a corporate, a strategic corporate, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
So I like where you're going with that, Lisa, because we I think get too wrapped up in the milestones around funding, and I think we should be thinking about what does the business need.
Yeah.
Because capital is only one one thing, right? Okay, CTO. Want me to go back to that? So first of all, I think that the founders need to have a very so I'm actually writing a book right now, and the book is all about the people side of startups. And this is something that really hasn't been explored enough, and it's all the people aspects of startups. And the founders need to really have a heart-to-heart discussion about what they want their roles to be and who's best equipped to do what. And almost always, the CTO thinks the board is one thing, and they get in and they find out usually the board's something very different, and they don't like it, and it's not fun, and it isn't the play to their strengths, and so yet they're embarrassed. They don't necessarily want to say, "Well, take me off the board," because they made a big point out of stamping their feet and saying they needed to be on the board, and so it ends up being this kind of awkward thing. Or they're on the board, but they're not contributing, and they're just sitting there, and they don't really have a lot to say. And so I've seen it sort of be, but there have been some CTOs that have, business mind, and come in a different package, and are a different kind of CTO. So it's not always that. So there's different flavors, but that tends to be the exception and not the rule, based on my experience of all these 25 years.
Yeah.
And it invariably, when what I would say that the experienced entrepreneur who's been through it usually won't have multiple founders on the board to begin with.
Is a board advisor role helpful in that conversation or useful?
What do you mean?
So either by what's the word? I can't remember the word. Like, yeah, permission. Like, yeah, you can come to the board meetings.
Oh,
You
observer.
can listen.
Oh,
You can participate that way, but
totally.
you have no vote, right?
Absolutely. I think the leadership team should be involved in the board meetings, quite frankly. So yeah, I mean, I don't see that as an issue. I think if there's, them and being involved in seeing the sausage making, I think is actually a great idea. I actually worry when the CEO, creates a wall between the board and everything else in the company.
Mhm.
That's a red flag.
Yeah.
What do you think, Lisa?
Yeah, I agree. I think, I think this is an interesting time to bring up, just for people who don't know, this concept of board observer, because it's an interesting one. So more often than not, it's with an investor, right? Who's not the lead investor. So your other investors, as a part of the deal, the term sheet, they might say, look, we're not looking to be a director, but we would like board observer rights, which means they get to go attend the board meetings. They get access to all the same materials and information. They can weigh in on topics and questions, but they don't have an official vote. And they can often be very, very valuable, right? Just because they weren't the lead investor doesn't really mean anything about their sort of ability to value add to the company. So I would say don't discount that. But you can also make other people sort of unofficial board observers as well. To Janice's point, bringing in the leadership team. Like, I love a board meeting where the CFO is there, because if you have questions about financials, projections, estimates, sometimes, most of the time, the CEO can answer, but sometimes they can't because it's just too in the weeds. They're doing a million things or whatever. And the ability to directly bring in the CFO to the conversation, I think, is a really important and a valuable one for everybody in the room.
Good. Well, so that leads me to another question, and actually one of the Q&A questions is related to this too. So, board directors have terms, and when a board member comes on early, for example, and I'm curious what you guys think. I've heard this many times over the years. An angel investor wants to put in 50 grand, but they got to have a board seat or they won't invest. And super early, they're only raising like 250K or something like that. But the angel investor is insistent that they have a seat on the board.
Okay, so this is part of my book, and what I think it's super important about is, one, understanding what your values are, and values as founders individually, and important values of the company. And if somebody comes in and is sort of stomping their feet and saying, I have to have a board seat for that $50,000, do you share values? Are they the person that you want on that board? Because you have to live with them a long time. And so typically, when I see that kind of behavior, they're not somebody you want on the board.
Yeah.
And so I would vet them. I would want to know who their references are. I would put them through the same filter that I would put anybody else. It's not the check that gives them the board seat. So unfortunately, that tie to the money only comes, in my opinion, when it's a venture check. Anything else, there better be an understanding that this is somebody who adds value besides an angel check.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. And so if you do have an early board member, pre-seed or seed stage, and then you go to raise a bigger round, venture scale round, and that board member is going to be replaced. The VC comes in and says, no, we want 2 board seats, or that one's not acceptable to us, or that person needs to go. How often does that happen? And how do you handle that? When you have someone who wants to get on the board, you're going to raise money in 6 months, they're probably not going to last. How do you start that relationship with that board member so that they're aware that, if they're not an experienced board member, they might think, yeah, but I have a 1-year term, I'm going to be on the board for a year, and now it comes along and it's they get replaced.
I don't think you'd bring anybody on the board for sort of a 6 month to 1 year opportunity, knowing that there is an end in sight, right? So you might want to take advantage of their skills and expertise via an advisory role.
Mhm. Yeah.
But I don't think you would sort of say, hey, would you be a director? And by the way, like your term is 12 months because then we're bringing on some other investors and then we're giving you the boot.
Yeah, I agree.
So do you set a term at all, or just it's ongoing until it's agreed upon that they're going to leave?
Well, there's annual votes of the board typically of the slate. So depending on what your bylaws are, of course. So, it's not a given per se, but
So it's typical though then that the board votes to say that board member, it's just not a good fit. We want that board member to go. It's a board decision by vote
it's
among the
actually
board.
shareholder
Oh,
decision.
right. Yeah, yeah. But the majority of the shareholders are probably on the board.
Yeah, but that's ugly. You don't want to get there.
Yeah.
You don't want to get there. Claudius made an interesting point, by the way, and I should have brought it up, which is in deciding who sits on the board as it relates to founders, you got to think about how time is used. And do you want your CTO's time to be used for doing board duties when they should be creating the architecture that's going to impact the valuation of the future? So, I mean, his point really is any of us, right? Any of the founders, what's the highest and best use of time? I mean, there's so many decisions in a startup that you have to think about it that way. Like there's so little time and so much to do.
Well, let's talk about that for a second too, because what I think a lot of early founders, I certainly didn't know this my first time around, like how much work it is to prepare for a board meeting, and then to have the board, and then to do the follow up, and to do the research, and to do all these things that you need to do. So, talk a little bit about what's the overhead of a CEO being on their board, and what they have to do, how often, and how to prepare, and how to run that meeting. Right? This is a big topic, but shed some light for founders who've never been the CEO sitting on their board, and how much work that is.
Sorry, Bob, I'm just going to go back to the topic or the question we were addressing earlier about terms. I was going to say all of my board terms have been, and even for early stage startups, unless I was an investor, so as an independent board member, they've actually been 2 years in length.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So I think to Janice's point, it depends on what the bylaws are. Now you can often the bylaws will account for allowing somebody to sit for another term or another 2 terms. So let's just say a term is 2 years. I could potentially sit for 6 years. And then they, the rules, the bylaws say like I need to move on, and they bring somebody in with a different perspective and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That way, I think it's really great because then you do keep the independence of the board member. Once you start hitting 6 years, 8 years that we've all been working together, I'm really not independent anymore. I'm so invested in the company. I know you, I know your family, I know everything that's happening. It's not really an independent perspective anymore.
Yeah, it'd be nice if the S&P 500 had that same policy, wouldn't it?
I know. There are a lot of board members in these public companies that have been on the boards for like 11, 12 years.
20.
Really amazing.
Yeah, and they extended it, They were going to term limit them out by age, and they extended the age.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing.
Yeah, that's
so in terms of time, well, first of all, the one question, the beginning question is how often does the board meet? And I think in the early days, it needs to meet more often than, once it gets to a certain maturity level. And, that could be monthly, it could be every other month. I think monthly is too often, quite frankly, because the overhead is too much. So I think every other month is probably fine. And in terms of preparing, Lisa probably can answer this, better because she's the finance person. I mean, there's the financial package. It's pretty simple in the early days because there's not a lot of complicated financial information. I like to see a CEO report so that there's netted out in a succinct way. Because otherwise, what happens is the CEO comes in and rambles and sort of talks through everything. And I think it's helpful to send out something ahead of time. And by the way, I like to personally see something a couple of days ahead. I don't want to see it the day of the meeting because I don't have time to digest it. And mine might be in meetings all day. Even the day before, I might not have time to get to it. That's a really hard one that I find is really challenging for startups.
I think 3 to 5 days is sort of a good amount of time.
It
And
is.
it's very difficult, I know, to get all of it done, but it does allow the board members to review and digest the information and come prepared with good questions or good dialogue. Because the last thing you want is to have a meeting just for the sake of a meeting where nobody's actually read the materials and you're all sitting there just sort of looking at each other and then like reading the slides up on the screen together. That's zero value add, a waste of everybody's time.
Especially because the update information should be digested ahead of time so that the board is actually spending the board meeting on substantive issues as opposed to all the updates.
Yeah.
That's one of my bugaboos, is that we're going through all of this. Really? This is what we're spending our board meeting on? If we're in a really significant fundraising time, a good update on the fundraising pipeline, conversations, all of that. Same thing with sales. If it's really critical that we have to close the first customers, whatever, getting a really good clean handle on the pipeline and the process and all of that. A lot of times having the person who's the CRO or the head of sales or whoever that is that's driving sales actually be there and give that report so that they can give the color commentary. Let's see what else. Oh, minutes from the last board meeting. Less is more. The less you put in board minutes, the better off you are. Your lawyer should tell you that. If they don't, you don't have the right lawyer. Probably they probably aren't a venture lawyer. What else, Lisa? That's like it.
The other thing, I mean, I've seen such a range in terms of the preparation and the materials that go out. I'm personally not a fan of the 85-page deck. I think it's too cumbersome for the company. There's a lot of regurgitation of stuff that should either be known or is not really helpful. I think the board deck should pull from as much as possible from existing materials and reports that sit within the company. So it's really more of a matter of distribution to the board as opposed to board preparation. I think sending them out in advance and to the extent possible, particularly when there's a significant topic that will be discussed, having pre-calls. So the CEO, whom I'm assuming is the chairperson of the board, calls each board member and says, "Hey, Bob, let's talk about this. I want to make you aware of blah, blah, blah. And this is going to come up at the board meeting," and having a really productive dialogue about that ahead of time. Because the worst thing that can happen as a board director is going into the board meeting and being surprised by an issue or a topic that gets raised there.
Yeah.
And as a CEO, you really want to vet those things and get everybody's perspectives, know where they stand before you get into that boardroom.
Yeah. Temperature check is a great thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also have legal counsel, typically they're serving as a secretary if you have a venture counsel. And typically they are at the board meetings. So I don't know if we haven't raised that, but that's.
Oh yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah. Okay, so we've hit on maybe 10% of what I hope we cover, but this has been really good. I just want to, I'm going to look through the questions real quick. I want to just ask a couple questions from folks listening. So one founder is wondering, if you're the CEO and you're the chair, and then you hire a CEO to take that second board seat out of 5, now that they're not the CEO anymore, but they're still the chair, does the role of them as a chair differ from any other chair because they were the CEO and now they're not the CEO?
No.
And when you hear of or see a founder leave the board, what are some of the backstories on, like, when is it time for the CEO to not be on the board or not to be the chair of the board anymore?
A founder CEO, when is the right time for them not to be on a board?
Or not to be the chair?
To be the chair.
If it was a pretty nasty breakup, like if he didn't or she didn't leave on her own accord or their own accord, that's a difficult board situation. And that, as I recall, Travis Kalanick and the Uber board, that took Roger McNamee taking him out and having a very heart-to-heart conversation about that, because he wasn't going to go. And there was no way that he could be on that board and have an outside CEO come in. That was probably the most significant, most public situation like that.
Yeah.
So it depends on how you handle it, right? And whether it's been a surprise and it is a flogging, or I think the most recent one that came up was Imperity, I think,
Hmm.
or the Imperity CEO left, and I don't know whether he's on the board or not. I don't know that he stayed. So I think it was amicable, but I think there were other issues. I think emotionally, if a founder started the company and they're not involved any longer, it's really hard to see it. I think that's the thing. I think that sometimes they want to go start their next company, or they want to just get out of town and take a year off and travel the world.
Yeah.
So a lot of times they pull the trigger, because it's really hard to sit back and see somebody make other decisions that you don't agree with.
I will say, I'll share a personal story. I was interviewing for an independent board seat, and the founder was the CEO, and he acknowledged to me that he was transitioning and he
Mhm,
was going to remain chair of the board, but was bringing in a new CEO.
mhm,
And I had an opportunity to interview with the new CEO who was also going to join the board.
mhm,
But I actually declined the appointment because for me, in sort of meeting the two people and knowing the two personalities, particularly the chairperson of the board,
mhm,
it didn't seem like a good productive setup to me. The
mhm,
chairperson, who had previously been the CEO and was a founder of the company,
mhm,
very opinionated, very assertive, very had a vision of what he wanted the company to be and all these things. And I just
mhm.
saw
Ooh,
a lot of friction in
Hmm.
the pipe for the new CEO. Like, is he going to be given the opportunity to, bring up his own strategic vision and execute
yeah,
against that? Or are we just really going to have board meetings that the chairperson of the board is dictating everything and exactly just butting
mm,
up heads against?
mm,
So, it's a really interesting situation. I think a lot of times it has been done well, but it can also be done very poorly as well. And I think all sides need to think about what that scenario is. And as a CEO, like, you might even think about, wow, if this person's going to remain on the board in the chair position, like, is that something where I feel like I'm going to
mm.
have enough autonomy to really lead the company in the way that I want?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a situation with a board where the founder, we closed on the venture round, and the founder decided, I really don't want to be the CEO. I really love product. I really want to focus on product. I don't really like this thing.
Hmm.
Um, and so we brought in a really great CEO who really loves founders and who really reveres founders and is respectful of founders. And we knew the board that we had to have somebody that had that respect. Not I want to be the smartest person in the room. I'm now the CEO. You guys are toast.
Yeah.
And the founder stayed as the chair, and it worked really well.
Yeah.
But it was that pairing and being really sensitive and making sure everybody was involved in the process. But it was his idea.
Yeah.
I think it's a great point and an opportunity to bring up this idea of like board fit or chemistry, right?
Mhm,
And I think so much about of this is really good relationships
mhm,
and synergistic relationships. And so, just as you would like in dating somebody, I think you need to spend the time understanding like, who is this person that I'm potentially inviting to the board? Like, could we work well together? Would I enjoy being in a meeting with them? Do I respect their opinions? Do they operate in a way that I can appreciate and that resonates with me? And I think
mhm.
you really have to do that because otherwise, I mean, it can go really well, as Janice just described, and other times it can go really poorly, as sort of I had described.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've been in a lot of those that you've been in, Lisa, where you
Yeah.
you got out, but I was living with it. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much. This has been terrific. I learned a lot. I appreciate that. I think, one of my takeaways from this that I'm going to start sharing
Mhm,
with founders that I work with is to think about an advisory board as training wheels for running a board, and also as a resource, to Lisa's point as well, about finding great board members, and particularly probably independent board members. Someone in the audience had asked, like, what are resources for recruiting independent board members, and I think that's a really good resource, really good way to use your resource as an early startup to develop your chops around managing professional executives and also getting to know them and maybe finding a board member. So thank you personally for that. So this has been terrific. We're gonna, for everybody who's listening, so we're gonna send out a list of a few resources, and Janice and Lisa, thank you guys so much for your time.
Sure.
If you guys are amenable, let me know. I'm sure there's some other questions. I might try to relay some other questions.
Yeah, I'm going to put my email right in here because I see some questions we didn't get a chance to answer, and I'm happy to answer.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And we'll be following up with everybody who's here today also on email. Well, thank you again. So we're gonna stop here on this discussion, and we're gonna move on to the networking. So please, everybody, if you'll just give it 5 minutes, stay as long as you want. Maybe you go the whole time, but just give it a try and let me know what you think. Shoot me a note or ping me, text or message me here. I'm going to go participate myself for a couple rounds, and I'll be sitting at the tables. Thank you guys all for coming. I'm looking forward to doing much more of this. And Janice and Lisa, I just can't say enough. This has been tremendous. I know everybody learned a lot. I certainly did too. So thank you guys all.
Thank you.
Thank you.